Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at AI and children's rights. And you've given us a really fascinating mix of sources this time around. We've got academic papers, some in Turkish, some in English. We've got legal analyses and even an opinion piece by a children's rights advocate. So it really seems like AI is everywhere these days. But what does that mean for kids? I mean, are their rights being protected in this new digital landscape? Well, that's what we're here to find out.
You've hit the nail on the head there. What's really interesting is how AI is already so deeply embedded in children's lives. I mean, practically from the moment they're born. Think about all the tech aimed at kids. Educational apps that adapt to their learning, or toys that respond to their voice, even social media platforms specifically designed for younger audiences. So, we're not just talking about the future of AI anymore. It's already shaping childhood right now.
That's a great point. It's not some far-off sci-fi scenario anymore. And with UNICEF saying that 175,000 children are going online for the first time every single day, it feels like we're just adding this whole new layer of complexity to their development. It's both exciting and a little bit daunting all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Manex Tokié, the children's rights advocate you mentioned, well, they argue that we're in completely uncharted territory here. We're not just preparing kids for a future with AI, we're raising them in a world where AI is already actively influencing their development, their choices, even their understanding of the world around them.
That makes me think about the whole data privacy issue. I mean, we all know adults are grappling with this. But what about kids? Are there even laws in place to protect their data in this rapidly changing digital environment?
There are, but keeping them up to date, it's like trying to catch a runaway train, honestly. We have frameworks like the EU's GDPR, the U.S. Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, and even legislation in Turkey. But the problem is technology advances so much faster than lawmakers can keep up.
It does feel like a constant game of catch-up. And even when we do have laws in place, how effective are they really in the real world?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, we've seen high-profile cases like the FTC taking action against companies like VTech and YouTube for mishandling children's data. And, these cases really highlight the gap between what the law intends and what's actually happening out there.
You mentioned sharenting earlier. Could you elaborate on what that is and why it's relevant here?
Sure. Sharenting is essentially the trend of parents sharing information about their children online. Posting that cute photo or sharing a funny anecdote. It might seem harmless, but parents often don't realize they're creating this digital footprint for their child that could have really long-term consequences. I mean, they're making choices about their child's privacy without their child's consent. It raises all sorts of ethical and legal questions that we're only beginning to grapple with.
Let's talk about YouTube specifically. I think a lot of parents, myself included, have this love-hate relationship with it. It can be a source of entertainment, even education. But there are also these concerns about the content that kids are exposed to. It almost feels like a digital babysitter at times, which is a bit unnerving.
It's definitely a powerful platform, and it's become a really dominant force in children's digital lives. But the way YouTube's recommendation algorithm works can be problematic. You see, it prioritizes keeping viewers engaged above all else, which means prioritizing watch time, not necessarily whether the content is educational or even age-appropriate.
So it's less about quality and more about keeping those little eyes glued to the screen.
Exactly. And that's where things get tricky, especially for children whose brains are still developing. They're much more susceptible to persuasive design and addictive patterns. The algorithm might push sensationalized content or create these filter bubbles and potentially expose them to harmful or inappropriate material, all in the name of maximizing engagement.
That's a really important point, and one that I think a lot of parents might not even be aware of. It's not just about monitoring what your child searches for. It's about understanding how the platform itself is designed to keep them hooked.
And what about YouTube Kids? Isn't that supposed to be a safer space for children?
Well, it's marketed as such, yes.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it is a safer environment. But there have been a lot of instances of disturbing content slipping through the cracks. We've seen videos with violence, inappropriate language, and even disturbing themes disguised as children's entertainment.
So it's not a foolproof solution. This makes me think about YouTube's end-to-end encryption. They say it's meant to protect user privacy, but doesn't that also make it harder to detect and remove child exploitation content? It feels like a double-edged sword.
It is. While encryption can be a valuable tool for protecting privacy, it also creates challenges for law enforcement and child protection agencies trying to combat online exploitation. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, unfortunately, and it really highlights the need for a much more nuanced approach to protecting children in the digital age. So we've talked about data privacy and the potential dangers lurking on platforms like YouTube. But AI is also making its way into education. Some say it's a revolution in personalized learning, while others raise concerns about bias and fairness. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this.
It's definitely a fascinating and complex area. Let's start with the potential benefits. AI can streamline school enrollment processes, making it easier for kids to access education, like that system they're using in Boston. Then there are personalized learning platforms that can adapt to each student's individual needs and learning style, creating a much more engaging and effective learning experience.
That sounds really promising. Imagine a classroom where every child is learning at their own pace, with materials tailored to their specific strengths and weaknesses. It's almost like having a personal tutor for every student.
Exactly. And for children with disabilities, AI-powered assistive technologies can be absolute game changers. For example, a child who struggles with dyslexia could use a program that analyzes their reading patterns and provides personalized exercises to address their specific needs. AI can help level the playing field and open up a world of possibilities.
Those are some great examples of how AI can be used to make education more accessible and effective. But you mentioned concerns about bias and fairness earlier. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Right. This is where things get a bit tricky. While AI algorithms can be incredibly powerful, they can also inherit and even amplify existing biases. Remember that case in the UK where an algorithm used for medical school admissions inadvertently discriminated against women and minority applicants? Well, this same issue can occur in any field where AI is used to make decisions, including education.
So even with the best intentions, these systems can end up perpetuating the very inequalities they were meant to address.
Unfortunately, yes. We've seen this happen with algorithms used for student placements. Errors can occur, leading to children being assigned to schools that aren't a good fit for their needs. And even more troubling is the potential for algorithmic bias to reinforce existing social and economic disparities.
That's a lot to consider. So it seems like AI in education is this kind of double-edged sword. It has immense promise for personalized learning and breaking down barriers, but it also requires this very careful attention to fairness and equity to ensure that all children benefit.
You've summed it up perfectly. It's about finding that balance, being aware of the potential pitfalls, and constantly evaluating and refining these systems to ensure they truly serve all children equitably.
Okay, that's all really thought-provoking stuff. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another area where AI is making waves and causing quite a bit of controversy: facial recognition technology in schools. It sounds like something straight out of a dystopian sci-fi film. But it's actually happening in schools all over the world, both in China and parts of the US. It's being used to track attendance, monitor student movement, and even analyze classroom behavior. And I have to admit, it makes me a little uneasy.
I understand your concern. The idea of children being constantly monitored by AI-powered cameras does raise a whole host of ethical and legal questions. It's one thing to use technology for security purposes, but quite another to subject children to constant surveillance in the name of efficiency or discipline.
Exactly. I can't help but think about the potential impact on children's development. Imagine growing up in an environment where you're constantly being watched and analyzed, judged by an AI system that might not fully understand the nuances of human behavior.
It could definitely have a chilling effect on their willingness to express themselves freely, to take risks, to just be themselves. And as we've seen in other areas, facial recognition technology itself can be flawed, particularly when it comes to identifying people of color and women.
So there's the potential for misidentification, for children being wrongly disciplined, or even facing more serious consequences because of errors in the technology. It's a frightening thought.
It is. And it raises some very fundamental questions about privacy, autonomy, and the right to a childhood free from unnecessary surveillance. These are questions we need to be asking ourselves as societies as we grapple with the implications of these powerful technologies.
Speaking of grappling with implications, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. It's clear that AI is transforming the world around us, including the lives of children.
We've explored both the potential benefits and the potential risks, from the rise of personalized learning to the ethical challenges of facial recognition in schools.
And honestly, we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to discuss, including the global efforts to regulate AI and the crucial role that parents, educators, and children themselves can play in shaping a future where AI is used ethically and responsibly.
So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of this fascinating and rapidly evolving landscape. Welcome back to our deep dive into AI and children.